اونچه مهمه این است که یه عده آدم تحریک شده مزدور دشمن
The heavy silence that usually defines the night under the regime's strict curfew has been completely shattered across Iran. We are receiving breaking reports indicating that active volatile protests have erupted in at least 20 different provinces, marking a significant escalation in civil unrest. This is a massive tidal wave of dissent stretching all the way from the capital of Tehran to the spiritual center of Mashhad and spanning from Isfahan down to Avaz. The question on everyone's mind right now is simple. Does the regime have any control left? Or is the grip of authority finally slipping? Intelligence from the ground is moving fast, and while the situation is fluid, opposition sources suggest a stunning breakdown in command. Local authorities have reportedly been weakened or completely neutralized in roughly 15 major cities. Viral footage flooding onto social media platforms paints a chaotic picture. We are seeing highly unusual scenes where feared security forces are being forced to retreat, overwhelmed by the sheer number of citizens reclaiming their streets in several districts. In response to an uprising that is growing with the unstoppable force of an avalanche, the Khamenei theocracy is alleged to have taken a desperate scorched earth measure to stop the bleeding. They have initiated a total digital blackout, effectively pulling the plug on the internet across the entire nation of Iran to stop the flow of information. But you have to ask yourself what actually happens when you cut off a population's connection to the world in the middle of such violent kinetic protests? Does it silence them? Or does it make them more desperate? Does the movement die in the dark? Or do the Iranian people push forward, advancing on Basij strongholds and IRGC facilities to neutralize the regime's propaganda machine in Isfahan? In this special report, we are going to walk you through the timeline step by step, analyzing how the Iranian people have passed an incredible test of resilience despite the brutal countermeasures deployed by Tehran. To truly understand the anatomy of this chaotic night and how the regime's security apparatus was seemingly paralyzed, we need to rewind and take you back to ground zero, where this spark first ignited. It didn't start in a liberal enclave. It began in Mashhad. This city is considered the regime's safest harbor, the birthplace of Supreme Leader Khamenei, and the supposed ideological fortress of the Islamic Republic. Understand the gravity of this Mashhad was not just another city on the map. It was the beating heart of the regime's religious legitimacy, a place they thought was untouchable. However, everything changed overnight. The massive flag of the Republic waving in the streets of Mashhad was torn down and shredded not by outsiders, but by the very conservative base the regime expected to remain loyal until the end. This was a defining moment in history, recorded as the physical and symbolic shattering of the regime's authority. When you lose your own backyard, you have lost the mandate to rule. This fire, which started in the country's spiritual capital, did not stay contained. It spread with terrifying speed, triggering a domino effect that is now hitting the regime's sensitive nerve centers across the map. When we analyze the open-source intelligence data and the limited clips leaking out from the field, it becomes clear that this chaos spread uncontrollably, moving like a virus through the state's defenses. The spark in Mashhad jumped south within a matter of hours, landing in the province of Khuzestan. This area is the absolute lifeblood of the Iranian economy, and losing it would be fatal for the leadership. What unfolded in Avaz, the epicenter of the nation's oil facilities and refineries, looked less like a protest and more like total citywide anarchy and open rebellion. In unverified but compelling footage provided by local sources, it appeared that the protesters had gained both numerical and psychological superiority, pushing back against heavily armed regime enforcers. The shocking withdrawal of security forces from the streets of Avaz is a major development that cannot be overstated. It signaled that the regime has lost not only its control over public order, but also its ability to protect the economic lifelines that keep the government solvent. This alleged loss of control in Khuzestan and the wider Avaz region is not just a simple law and order issue to be swept under the rug. It could very well signal the structural failure of Iran's autocratic system. Remember, Avaz is the beating heart of Iran's oil production infrastructure. If those facilities shut down, if the workers go on an indefinite strike, or worse, if control falls into the hands of anti-regime factions, Iran's sole source of hard currency oil exports will grind to a complete halt. It is a simple equation. When the oil taps are turned off, the cash flow dries up. You cannot pay the salaries of the besieged militia members defending the palaces in Tehran without petrodollars. A mercenary who does not get paid is a mercenary who will walk away. They will likely not risk their lives to protect a regime that is bankrupt. This is the economic paralysis scenario, the absolute worst nightmare for the ruling elite. But the shock that really terrified the regime was happening simultaneously at what we call the striking points. Breaking reports from the northern city of Rasht and unverified images flooding in indicate that the situation has crossed a critical violent threshold. It is alleged that a local Basij base, the headquarters of the regime's most loyal paramilitary force, was stormed and overrun by angry crowds who refused to back down. Even more concerning for the leadership, there are unverified but extremely serious reports surfacing right now. These reports suggest that some of the weapons and live ammunition stored inside those bases have fallen directly into the hands of the people. This scenario, an armed populace, is the darkest nightmare for the high-ranking generals sitting in Tehran. But believe it or not, this may not even be Khamenei's biggest problem. Because in Isfahan, the regional headquarters of the Islamic Republic of Iran, broadcasting the stronghold of state propaganda was targeted. This facility, which disseminates the regime's orders and narratives, is said to have been set ablaze with massive flames, lighting up the night sky visible for miles. The burning of a regime's broadcasting organ is a powerful symbol. It means the silencing of the state's voice and the blinding of its eye. It is the people's way of screaming a message: we are no longer listening to you. We are done watching your lies, and we are done listening to the capital Tehran. Social media posts that managed to make it out before the blackout showed large numbers of protesters marching directly towards the Revolutionary Guard headquarters. Later, unconfirmed reports coming out of Iran and videos shared on the platform X claim that protesters in Fars province had actually seized and taken control of a Revolutionary Guard facility. There is a significant amount of footage circulating regarding this incident, and analysts are saying the IRGC is genuinely struggling to maintain any semblance of control in these sectors. While this situation will likely be described by Tehran as crossing a red line, a critical move by the government has emerged that changes the game entirely. The regime's response to this all-out siege and coordinated attack was to execute the biggest digital panic decision we have seen in modern history. According to real-time data from major news agencies like the BBC and Reuters, along with the global internet watchdog NetBlocks, the Tehran administration has severed the internet, cut electricity, and even disabled landlines across the country in a frantic attempt to prevent the protests from being organized further. This blackout is being viewed by international observers as the clearest admission of defeat, proof that the regime can no longer control the events on the ground, so they are trying to hide them in the dark. Prince Reza Pahlavi, speaking from exile, stated that the regime is in a deep state of fear and is trying to cut off the internet once again to cover up their losing battle. Make no mistake, this specific blunder isn't just a slip-up. It is looking like the absolute fatal blow that brings the whole house of cards down. Tehran's hardliners are gambling on a massive strategic error here, failing to realize that the street mobilization we are seeing in 2026 has evolved far beyond the Mahsa Amini uprisings of a few years back. Today's resistance is battle-hardened, significantly better resourced, and frankly, they have developed a herd immunity to the fear tactics that used to work. The state tried to construct a total Orwellian nightmare, a digital dragnet linking traffic cams and security grids with advanced facial recognition software to pinpoint dissidents. On paper, their strategy was terrifyingly straightforward. They intended to digitally tag every single person stepping onto the pavement, follow them home virtually, and execute quiet midnight raids to suffocate the movement before it could breathe. But the youth on the ground had a countermove ready to go, launching what they are calling a massive blinding operation against the state. We are seeing incredible footage coming out of North Khorasan and Shirvan showing brave individuals scaling utility poles to smash, dismantle, or spray paint the very lenses the government uses to spy on them. It is a textbook case of urban asymmetric warfare, literally gouging out the regime's eyes in the physical world to render their digital dominance completely useless. So while the mullahs tried to cut the lights with internet blackouts, the streets responded by cutting the vision of the state intelligence apparatus. As that technological advantage flipped in favor of the protesters, the foundation of fear that held this entire dictatorship together started showing massive structural cracks. But folks, if you look closely at these clips, there is an incredibly telling detail that the mainstream headlines are largely missing, and it changes everything. It is the undeniable hesitation, and in some cases, total passivity we are witnessing from police units and security forces right in the heart of Tehran and the provinces. Intelligence reports are confirming that in multiple sectors, uniformed officers aren't engaging. They are standing by as spectators and in some startling instances actively retreating from the crowds. History tells us that for any authoritarian rule, the specific second a riot cop lowers his baton and refuses to swing is the beginning of the absolute end. Once that chain of command snaps and the foot soldiers start questioning why they are brutalizing their own neighbors and families, the regime has crossed a point of no return. That is when the system starts rotting from the inside out, not because of foreign airstrikes, but because the very people paid to protect the throne simply stop obeying orders. Simultaneously, the opposition is executing a masterclass in psychological warfare far more sophisticated than anything we have seen in previous decades. There is a viral survival playbook circulating right now, recorded by a brave female activist, that perfectly illustrates this new level of strategic maturity. It acts as a training manual on how to handle interrogation with the ice-cold demeanor of a spy, instructing detainees to lie convincingly and claim they despise the traitorous diaspora abroad. She tells them to put General Soleimani's face on their phone lock screens, essentially beating the system by pretending to be its biggest fans. Every single one of these countermeasures comes directly from that viral video tutorial spreading across the encrypted channels. This level of preparation completely neutralizes the psychological dominance interrogators rely on when they drag people into those holding cells. We are no longer looking at terrified victims paralyzed by a scary government. The dynamic has totally shifted. These protesters have morphed into savvy street strategists who know exactly how to gaslight the system from the inside. It creates a fog of war where the regime's ideological vetting fails because even a brutal state hesitates to purge people who look and act exactly like loyalists. But this breakdown in control is going way beyond simple acts of civil disobedience. It has escalated into a full-blown war on the sacred symbols the theocracy has forced down the public's throat for over 40 years. Across Tehran and major urban centers, we are getting reports of shrines and billboards honoring Qasem Soleimani and IRGC commanders being torched. Remember, Soleimani wasn't just a general. He was the regime's shadow commander, their untouchable holy martyr of Middle Eastern expansion. Watching his image burn in the streets is equivalent to watching the regime's ideological legitimacy turn to ash. The public is violently rejecting the state's mythology, signaling loud and clear that the old boogeyman tactics about foreign enemies do not work anymore. They know the real enemy is in Tehran, not Washington. And you can see this shift clearly in the radical new slogans taking over the boulevards. Back in the Green Movement of 2009, the crowds were simply asking, "Where is my vote, Howard?" hoping for soft reform within the Islamic Republic. That era is gone. Today, the chant is explicit and uncompromising. Khamenei must go, Pahlavi must return, a cry that is resonating across the entire country. Perhaps the most shocking visual is the open display of the imperial lion and sun flag, the pre-revolution standard, waving fearlessly in places like Khorramabad. This is a symbol so strictly banned that simply owning one could land you in a dungeon for years. Yet, 45 years later, the Shah's portrait is back in the public square. And, let's be clear, this isn't just sentimental nostalgia. It is a fierce political declaration that the people want their secular nationalist history back, rejecting the current theocratic darkness. The mullahs spent decades trying to force-feed a religious identity, but the population is spitting it out and reclaiming their true Persian heritage. This is a total ideological collapse, a kind of spiritual damage that no amount of tanks, bullets, or prisons can ever fix. When you zoom out and look at the big picture, the timing here is catastrophic. For the leadership, Iran is walking directly into a perfect storm. But there is one massive factor getting lost in the noise, a silent killer, that is going to be the absolute final nail in the coffin for this government. I'm talking about the quiet revolution unfolding right now in the historic corridors of Tehran's Grand Bazaar. If the street riots are attacking the regime's body, the strikes and shuttered shops in the bazaar are definitively cutting off its oxygen supply. We are watching a historical twist of fate unfold in real time, folks. It is ironic that the powerful Bazari merchant class, the very group that bankrolled the revolution back in 1979, has now aimed its crosshairs directly at the theocratic structure they helped build. This strike by the conservative business class is a game changer because they have traditionally been the financial spine and loyal piggy bank of the entire regime. Their defiance sends a signal to Tehran that is infinitely more dangerous and deadly than any student protest ever could be. The reason is simple. When the merchants flood the streets, the fight stops being about abstract ideologies. It immediately becomes about the cold, hard math of empty pockets, hungry stomachs, and basic survival. We are looking at the Iranian rial in a complete death spiral against the US dollar, and at this point, calling it an inflation figure doesn't do it justice. What we are witnessing is a massive nationwide economic cardiac arrest. In this chaotic environment, shopkeepers are terrified to sell a single item. and hoarding has become a necessary survival reflex. The regime hasn't just shattered its political authority, it has completely lost the ability to keep the commercial cycle spinning. The country is currently grappling with a multi-front disaster, facing not only a devastating economic depression, but also a catastrophic water shortage, an environmental collapse, crumbling infrastructure, and a level of global isolation that is suffocating the nation. The economic model they touted as the mullah's resistance economy, a system that essentially snatches food from family tables to fund ballistic missile programs, has officially imploded. The aquifers are running dry, the oil infrastructure is rusting away, and the government is realizing you cannot discipline a population with hunger when they are already starving. These protests happening right now are not a calculated political choice. They are a raw biological fight-or-flight response. Citizens are pouring into the streets for one simple reason: they have absolutely nothing left to lose. On the geopolitical chessboard, Iran is enduring the loneliest chapter in its history. Russia is too bogged down in its own quagmire in Ukraine to offer even a finger of support to Tehran. Meanwhile, China is playing the long game. They don't want to risk their energy imports on an unstable partner, so they are watching quietly from the sidelines. Even their regional proxy forces, which took decades to build, have been hammered into irrelevance by the Western coalition. So looking at the big picture, the Khamenei regime appears to be completely checkmated, trapped by enemies both inside and outside the gates. As you can see, Iran's fair-weather friends are likely the first ones jumping ship. After being cut off from Western tech and modern governance for 47 years, the bill has finally come due. But with the influx of Starlink terminals and advanced mesh network technologies, we are entering a brave new era. We have reached a point where a dictator's favorite trick, shutting down the internet, is rendered completely useless. The Khamenei regime might survive tonight, maybe they can brute force their way through another week. But the fundamental strategic equation has shifted permanently. Although the leadership is terrified of losing its legitimacy, frankly, that ship has sailed and a total collapse seems like the inevitable conclusion. Regimes built on terror only last as long as the people remain afraid. But in Iran, that wall of fear came crashing down last night. There is no reverse gear on this movement now. Iran is standing on the precipice of a painful, bloody, but absolutely necessary rebirth. This transition could mark the death of a theocratic empire and the rise of a true nation-state from the ashes. The clock is ticking down for the mullahs. The hourglass has been flipped. They can cut the power grids all they want. They can try to throttle the internet, but they can no longer extinguish the fire of awakening that is blazing in the minds of millions of people. That long dark winter that started in 1979 is finally coming to an end. This isn't just a wave of protest we are watching. It is a civilization's desperate struggle to reclaim its own destiny. And the reality that has authoritarians from the Kremlin to Beijing shaking in their boots is simply this: no palace walls are stronger than the will of the people. There's no such thing as a secure status quo for the Iranian regime anymore. The bells are tolling for Khamenei's oppressive rule, and the echoes are bouncing off the walls of Tehran, signaling that the resistance is now rotting the regime from the inside out. The bottom line is this: the Iranian people have taken to the pavement. They are fighting not just to survive today, but to ensure there is a livable, breathing Iran left for their children to inherit. The regime can pull the plug on the internet and kill the lights, but they will never put out the light of a people's awakening. So I have to ask, what is your take on this? Do you think the Iranian people can actually pull off this analog revolution despite the digital darkness? Sound off in the comments below. Keep it locked right here as we continue our relentless pursuit of the truth.